Fahy, welcome to the programme.
Thank you, George.
And in the studio with me is President of the Irish Taxi Council, Frank Byrne. Frank, welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much, George.
Why I asked you gentlemen to come in today is there is a national strike scheduled for next week.
No, actually Thursday, George. It begins on Thursday.
Thursday.
Protest action actually begins on Thursday.
Well, there you are. It's even worse than I thought. But interestingly, none of the 5 taxi men I've used in the last 24 hours could tell me when it was, which is part of our discussion. Can I put it to you that part of the reason for all this and why the suggestion is you can't get meetings with ministers is because you're a hugely disparate group?
No, we're a hugely desperate group, I think, George, you'll find. At this stage now, these personal circumstances of people has gone beyond even help now at this stage. Even me personally, my car has been parked up outside my door for the last 4 weeks. I can't afford to fix it. So the situation is dire for the families.
All right, but let's talk about disparate though, just for a minute. I mean, taxi drivers are represented by SIPTU, the Federation of Irish Taxi Drivers, Capital Taxi Drivers, the Irish Taxi Council, and the National Private Hire and Taxi Association. Is that right or wrong?
That'd be right, George. Yeah.
And then there's probably another 5,000 or more who are members of nothing.
Well, within our own group, we have 27 organisations representing full-time drivers from around the country.
All right, but there isn't a common voice, though.
There isn't, and we're not about not achieving a common voice. The problem we have is that the people we have been negotiating for the last 10 years have had very little success. Because of the stance of the office we're dealing with, George, So from our point of view, the people that support us just have had enough, and they can't take any more.
Deputy Fahy, last September, and I have to congratulate the Oireachtas Committee on Transport for their involvement, in my view, in this whole thing, because it was the only sort of sensible stuff that I could read coming out of Dáil Éireann. You made 11 recommendations. Is there any sign of these actually taking place?
Well, some of them have been put into place, George, and hopefully that will bring about improvements. But I can understand the frustrations that Frank has. I talked with him on a number of occasions. And there are, without any question or doubt, very serious difficulties. And I'm not happy, as you well know, with the response of the regulator. I believe there are further things that can and should be done. But I do believe, honestly, that, staging a protest, and I appreciate exactly where Frank is coming from, won't achieve very much at this stage. And I would rather that, and I did speak to Noel Dempsey before he went away to the States, that perhaps he should meet with the taxi, representatives across the spectrum and at least sit down and listen to their views at the moment. And let's see what we can do to try and further improve their situation. And one of the important developments, George, that has happened is that the new National Transport Authority will be taking over the role of the taxi regulator, although the Taxi Regulation Office is being subsumed in there and the taxi regulator will still be employed. But the responsibility will rest with the new Chief Executive and Chairman of the new organisation. And while that won't happen for some time, one of the things we're anxious for in the committee is that it will happen as quickly as possible. And in fact, I've arranged to meet the Chairman and Chief Executive of that new authority, which is the National Transport Authority, next week. And one of the issues I'm going to talk to them about is the continuing, dissatisfaction among taxi drivers, because I do believe that to have a good taxi service, you need to have taxi drivers that are earning a reasonable living and are reasonably happy with their lot. And clearly that's not the situation. Okay. And we have to address it.
But Deputy Fahy, I've got the 11 recommendations from your committee. They all make sense, and they are the kind of things taxi drivers have been asking for years, and any reasonable person would ask for them. The idea of a moratorium for 3 years, the idea that there is an inadequacy of taxi ranks, the idea that the Gardaí be given responsibility for the enforcement of licensing, and so on and so on and so on. I mean, in a very cliched way, like, a lot of this isn't rocket science, but none of it exists, and so far we have no indication when it might exist. Is there any timeline?
Well, the moratorium has been introduced in that there are no further taxi licences being given out other than disabled taxi licences. The question of ranks is being addressed, where loading bays during the day are now being used as ranks at night, but there are still not enough ranks in the various cities. There was an important provision in the finance bill to try and make the whole business of part-timers and people on social welfare, to tighten that up, and I think that could be tightened up a lot more. For instance, the people who rent out taxi licences for a week and that kind of stuff should be made to keep a record and return it every month to the revenue commissioners and social welfare, because clearly a lot of the illegal activity is coming from that area. So there are a lot of extra things that I feel can be done, but unfortunately, I suppose our recommendations, all of them, haven't been listened to date, although there have been improvements, to be fair about it. But that's not to say that there aren't an awful lot of taxi drivers. I just talked to a very genuine man in Galway this afternoon who rang me, and the amount of money the man has made this last week has just been so pathetic. And he in actual fact, the reason he rang me was because he wanted me to help him to get on the dole.
Right. Okay, but the issue of a strike on Thursday, I mean, one, it won't really be national because a huge number of drivers aren't members of any kind of organisation, and they may well go ahead and do their own thing anyway. But you're hearing there for what I think is a very competent chairman of an Oireachtas committee. An Oireachtas committee that is clearly understood the taxi position. But how do you react to the fact that Frank Fahey spoke to the minister, and the minister isn't going to talk to you?
Well, we have...
Hold on, Frank was going to say something, yeah?
He didn't say that. He was going off to the States last week, and therefore it wasn't possible. But I would still hope that perhaps Noel Dempsey would meet a collective group from the various taxi organisations.
Right, but you've never spoken to the minister. Talk to me about that.
Well, we've been asking for a meeting with the minister for a long time now, over a year. A year and 3 months now at this stage. But just to address a couple of points, George, if I can, you're quite right. The majority of drivers in the industry are not members of any association, federation, union, or anything else, and we are trying to lend a voice for their opinion to be heard. In terms of the protests coming up, we had a meeting last week in Swords where the mandate was put from the floor, or the proposal was put from the floor, voted on. That is the mandate I've been given because of the fact that these changes are taking so long. The drivers are worried, frustrated and nervous about their future. They have nothing to look forward to at the moment. In the last 9 years, nothing has come forth from the Regulation Commission that either benefits the driver or doesn't cost them any more money.
Do the 11 recommendations, if approved, would they solve the problem? The
specific ones that we need in place are the buyback scheme, the cessation of the rental market completely, and the subsuming of the Commission into the NTA, because it is impossible to deal with the Commission. Do you accept that the Oireachtas subcommittee is attempting to solve the problem? Yeah, we're delighted with the support of the Oireachtas committee to all its members, and bear in mind it was a cross-party recommendation. Yes. Right across the parties. So yes, if that's put in place, it addresses a lot of the issues immediately, but there are still a lot of other issues that need to be seen. Is Thursday going ahead, and are you going to block the Lewis and O'Connell Street and all that sort of stuff? There'll be no illegal activity, George. It's a peaceful, dignified protest. I don't have the mandate to call that off, to be honest with you. All right, well, I'm delighted to hear that. My thanks there to Deputy Frank Fahey in Galway, Chairman of the Oireachtas Committee on Transport, and Frank Byrne, President of the Irish Taxi Council. Coming up after 5 o'clock, did the Celtic Tiger hide the sexual